Hey guys, Todd Levine here, founder of Agape Pastoral Services. So glad that you are joining me for this Book of the Month review. It's a cold, snowy day here in Minnesota, leading up to Christmas. I think we're supposed to get somewhere in the neighborhood of 6 to 8 inches of snow today, so the roads are a mess. And I'm recording this video from my home office in Coon Rapids, Minnesota. So anyways, I want to get into this book, and the book, you can see the title cover in the upper left-hand corner of your screen. The book name is Sexual Intimacy in Marriage, and it was a fantastic book. And before I get into the details of this book, I want to share with you the Book of the Month winner. We do draw one winner each month to send a copy of this book. And if you didn't register for this one, be sure that you register for the next one, and you'll find a link in the more information section below this video on how to register for next month's book. But this month's winner is Stephen Duke. Stephen and Kristen were premarital counseling clients of mine back in 2018. And I hope they enjoy this book, and I hope that it helps their marriage relationship with wherever it is at. So thanks again for all of those who registered. So let's get into this book. This book was authored, as you can see on the cover, by William Cutrer, MD, Sandra Glahn, PhD, and Michael Sitzma, PhD. Some pretty fancy names there. And when I first saw that book cover, I'm like, oh, is this book going to be like super intellectual and over my head? And couldn't be further from the truth. This book was written in a manner that was very understandable, very relatable. Never once did I feel like it was speaking over me, and has just tons of practical, great input on this topic of sexual intimacy. And so let's take a look at the book itself. What I think it does most is it raises lots of legit questions, and because the church as a whole has done a horrific job on this topic for centuries or millennia even. It's always been, for whatever reason, this dark, taboo, behind closed doors, keep it in the closet, don't talk about it, kind of a topic. And, guys, that's just so wrong. God has designed the institution of marriage. God has designed the institution of sexual intimacy between a man and a woman, and it's a beautiful thing. I mean, at the end of the day, sexual intimacy has three primary purposes, right? It has the purpose of procreation, which is a pretty obvious one. It has the purpose of protection. Now, that's a topic that people don't necessarily associate with intimacy, but it is an important part of consistent, regular intimacy with your spouse, is that it is designed to protect your marriage. And then also, thirdly, it is designed for pleasure. God designed pleasure for a husband and wife, and for it to be enjoyed, for them to have fun with it, for them to enjoy it and look forward to it. God designed it that way. And so why on earth would we associate shame with such a beautiful thing? And so this book does a great job of communicating the mechanical, practical aspects to the spiritual, relational aspects and dynamics of it. So overall, it was a great book. So let me throw out some things that it addresses. Number one, it addresses just the topic in general of what is sex, what is marriage, from God's perspective. It gets into the male and female anatomy. Now, I may not have seen any of these diagrams that the book lays out since I was in high school back in the day, but it was good to be reintroduced to something as simple and practical as the male and female body parts, and how they all work, and what the purpose is, and how they are involved with the idea of sexual intimacy and pleasure, and so on. It talked about the response cycles between a man and a woman, the stereotypical wham, bam, thank you, ma'am experience for the man, where it may only be a few minutes, to a day-long cycle and process and journey for the woman, from The moment she wakes up in the morning, based on how her husband treats her and acts towards her, until it culminates later that evening in the physical act of sex. It addresses that whole thing. What if interest levels vary? Now, again, stereotypically, television, movies, they all teach us, right, that the male is the sexually dominant, sexually driven one. He's the one that always wants sex, and the woman is the one that has the headache, and not now and maybe later. That we laugh about it when we see Everybody Loves Raymond or a television show that kind of pokes fun at that whole stereotype. But what if those roles are reversed? What if it's different in your marriage and in other marriages? What are we supposed to do with that? What does that look like? So it addresses that. Is it okay to fantasize? Legit question. Who should decide when to have sex? Is it the man's responsibility, the wife's, both? How does that work? How do I satisfy my husband, or how do I satisfy my wife? Great questions, getting down to, again, those physiological needs and how we can better satisfy our partner. What is an orgasm? What if my wife can't have an orgasm? It addresses those questions. How do I communicate? How do I communicate things like, I wish we could spice things up a little bit, or what if we tried this, or what if we tried that, or what if we introduced this apparatus or that apparatus? Awkward, weird questions that kind of make us squirm in our seats a little bit, but they're legit questions. So it gets that line of communication open. Are quickies okay? Legit question. For men, yeah, we're always raising our hand for a quickie, but for wives, are quickies a part of it? Do they play a role in your marriage relationship? Are any sexual practices not okay biblically? It addresses that question. There's a couple of chapters titled Questions Couples Ask, and then there's another one called Questions from Our Readers. So it's throwing out real person questions. It's not these three highly educated people that authored the book and them formulating their own questions, but they took questions from real people like you and me, and put those in the book and responded and answered those questions. There's a chapter called When Delight Becomes an Obsession, and it explores the whole topic of sexual addiction, pornography. Pornography is a real issue, especially in today's day and age of technology, and literally having it available at your fingertips in a moment's notice. Or you can be scrolling Facebook and a sexually explicit video or picture comes into your feed. I mean, what do you do with that? How do you broach that topic in marriage? How do you work through that as a husband and wife? And so it addresses all of that. Back to this whole idea that the church has done a horrible job with this topic over the centuries. This is one of the things I loved about the church that I was on staff at for 10 years back in the early 2000s. Our pastor, Jimmy, he just would go after this topic unabashedly. It was a topic that once, maybe twice a year, whether it was a standalone sermon, whether it was a marriage series, and he would tackle this topic. And I remember having what we called, as a staff, we would deem them PG-13 sermons, where our ushers were trained at the doors: do not let anybody under the age of 10 or whatever it was come through that door. And if the parent is insistent, make sure they understand that this is going to be a sexually explicit sermon message. And I loved that. That was so cool to me, because people were hearing, perhaps for the first time, biblical truth as it related to this topic of sexual intimacy. And so it was just fantastic. So end of the story is that there should be no shame. There should be no condemnation. It should be brought out into the light. It should be talked about between a husband and a wife. And so this book overall, in my opinion, is a must read. Whether you're pre-married, considering marriage, and you want to set up this institution within your marriage properly and on a solid foundation, or whether you've been married 30, 40, 50 years or more, there's something you can learn by reading this book. Honestly, it's a topic that we should never stop studying and learning. In my opinion, it's probably a top 3 topic in a marriage relationship that needs to be talked about. And why do I say that? I say that because I use this illustration with couples that I work with. And the illustration is this: if you neglect the area of sexual intimacy, it's much like the intimacy that you experience in your relationship and walk with God. Just follow along with me here for a minute. So if you think about your relationship with God, think about times when you have been close to God, where you just felt tight, like he was there, you felt his presence. If you looked at your life, what you were probably doing in that season is you were investing in it. You were in prayer, you were in his word, you were going to church regularly, you were hanging around with godly Christian people more time than not. And all of that fostered and facilitated this intimacy between you and God. Now, let life get busy for a period of time, especially if you've got kids at home and you're being pulled in a million different directions. You can feel your relationship with God distancing, separating. You can almost feel this chasm occurring. You miss your devotional time one day, you miss it another day, you miss it another day. Pretty soon, a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks goes by, and you've not spent any quality time with God. And he feels far away. He feels like he's in a different galaxy or something. And all of a sudden you realize, gosh, things just are not right. You know what? I've allowed my devotional life to be neglected. I need to get back into it. So the next morning you set your alarm clock early, you get up early, bam, you're back into that relationship with God. And it's like, boom, instantly, you feel right with God. You feel close to him again. Well, that's what happens with sexual intimacy between a husband and wife. It is no different, guys. This intimacy level between a husband and wife is largely dependent upon the recurrence, the consistency of being sexually intimate with your spouse. If I look at my marriage, with Jody, if a few days goes by, a week goes by, 2 weeks go by, I mean, I can feel the same type of chasm developing between her and I, and she feels it too. And she's normally the quicker one to catch it, because I think women in general are far more intuitive and far more sensitive to this type of thing. Us men can be, somewhat brain dead at times when it comes to it. And all Jody has to say is I don't feel connected to you, or I feel disconnected. And immediately my mind goes to, gosh, we haven't been intimate in how long has it been? And so we purpose ourselves to being intimate, as quickly as possible that night or the next day, or as quickly as possible. And the moment we are intimate again, it's just like, bam, boom, we are one again. And all of the awkwardness, the tension, the bickering, the distance that we had been feeling over those last few weeks is gone, and all is right with the world. I know that might sound silly to say, but things are right. Things feel good. Things are much more easily accomplished when we run into stumbling blocks if we are regular in our sexual intimacy. And so all of that said to say is that this is an incredibly important topic that you should never stop learning about. You should be diving into it all the time for the rest of your lives. And so let me close with this. Down below in the more information section, you are going to see some links. If things are not right in your marriage, if you need some help talking through some of these things, if you've allowed it to go too long and it almost feels insurmountable to get back to a healthy place with your spouse again, please reach out to me. Schedule a free discovery call. We can talk about it, get to know one another, see if you feel like I'm a good fit for you, and like I can provide some solutions to you and your marriage. Click on that link below for a discovery call. You can go to my website, and there's other links that you'll find below. So anyways, I better get going here. So I appreciate your time watching this video. Order the book. There's a link to the book below as well, and start reading this book together as husband and wife. Thank you so much, and I appreciate your time.